Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Nicky Woolf. Nicky, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nicky Woolf. I'm the reporter and host of The Sound Mystery of Havana Syndrome, which is out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks so much for coming on today. Yes, you are the host of a podcast limited series that recently completed its run, and the title once again is The Sound Mystery of Havana Syndrome, and links to it will be in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed the podcast a lot. You do a deep dive into this very strange story that has been like a bizarre mystery over the past
Yeah.
couple years, which is so-called Havana Syndrome. Let's start off. How did you arrive at this story? What attracted you to it, and how did you decide that a podcast was the medium you wanted to use to explore it?
Well, this is the weird road that I went down to get to this is it's my previous show. I did a show about QAnon, the kind of conspiracy ecosystem that led to January 6th.
Hmm.
And when I was a print reporter, I'd reported on conspiracy theories and kind of online radicalization and things like that. And so after I did that first show, I was approached by Bradley Hope at Project Brazen, which is the company that commissioned the show. And he was like, what are other mysteries that we were sort of batting some mysteries back and forth, and Havana Syndrome, because it was such a weird, shall I do a little kind of a brief, what Havana Syndrome is?
Sure. Probably most people are at least vaguely aware of it at this point, and we're taping a couple weeks after there was a big. It
Yeah.
was back in the news once again because there was a big government report about it released. But yeah,
Yeah.
so if people have not heard of the
Yeah,
Havana
so
Syndrome.
in super brief, it was this thing where in 2016 in Havana, American service personnel working at the newly reopened embassy started getting mysteriously sick, sort of headaches, nausea, insomnia, vision problems, hearing problems, and they'd all heard this weird noise. And so, as that kind of process, the first theory was that it might be some kind of sonic energy device being deployed. Other theories have involved different kinds of directed energy, or that it might be down to cricket sounds or some kind of pesticide. And it's just remained this mystery, and none of the US agencies seem to be able to agree on what it could have been. The sufferers have had to really fight to get paid attention to, and the US government, the Trump administration, used it as the reason to put Cuba back into kind of pariah state. Um, so that was the story as it stood when I came to it. And there was a whole other theory, which is that it could be psychogenic, like not made up, like not actively made up, but a sort of what's called a mass psychogenic event, or sort of a mass delusion, the sort of spread of the power of suggestion. And
Right.
and
So
so when I first,
this was once referred to as mass hysteria and is no
right,
longer referred to because of
yeah,
the sexist
exactly. So
origins
that's
of that
exactly.
phrase. Yeah.
And so I was brought in and was immediately kind of specifically open to that as an explanation, right? Like I was a conspiracy theory reporter. It wasn't quite explicit that I was being brought in to sort of debunk this, but that was kind of the vibe, right? And then as the more we did reporting, we discovered a whole load about, first of all, this long history going back way into the Cold War of directed energy and this kind of tactic being used by all sides. And we also discovered a lot about the more up-to-date development of the sort of devices that could do this. So once it became kind of in the realms of plausibility, and we'd heard also about how other countries had also been developing exactly this kind of tech, and we sort of saw the patents and the training videos for its use, suddenly it became much more plausible. And so we went on this crazy journey through this world of um, intelligence agencies and spy versus spy and all kinds of stuff like that. And it was just a crazy rabbit hole to go down.
Well, I would encourage anyone who is interested in this crazy story to listen to the podcast because I think you do a great job explaining, what actually happened as best as we can tell, and going through the various theories and taking everyone seriously, but skeptically looking at the different possibilities as well. I mean, a lot of people have been extremely skeptical of this story to begin with,
Yeah,
especially people who were not fans of Donald Trump or not fans of the CIA or the military
Right.
industrial complex or something, and have treated it, quite derisively.
Right. And like cast your mind back to the summer of 2017 and how completely bonkers everything was, right? Like had Scaramucci even happened by that point? Like there was the Trump Russia stuff in and of itself, and we can go into that a little bit later because it did get tied up in that
Right.
a little bit in our reporting. But there was so much going on at the time. It was really difficult um to figure out what the hell was going on, or even if something was going on. And also, there was new leadership at every agency. This started out with Rex Tillerson at State, and then that later became Mike Pompeo. Parts of the government aren't talking to other parts of the government. Everyone's kind of at war with themselves. So it happened during this completely crazy time.
Yeah, and people who were skeptical of anything Trump or the Trump administration put forth were skeptical of this, and I was a person like that as well. And
Right.
then it
And
had some sort of vague parallels to like the weapons of mass destruction
mhm,
claims, leading up to the invasion of Iraq, which was 20 years ago,
right.
exactly, of just like untested hypotheses and possible scaremongering and other things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's also the first theory that the Trump administration did put forward that it was a kind of acoustic weapon. I think Rex Tillerson first said was briefing that to the press, and I think Marco Rubio then leaked internal briefing saying that. But that didn't hold water. Like that
right.
was on the face of it, like it's not like there are sonic directed devices like this thing called an LRAD, but they're used for crowd control, right? Like these, it's a loud noise. Like that's not something that can be subtly used um, as some kind of targeted weapon. So that the first thing they were saying was also just completely ridiculous.
Right.
Um, but then it's sort of the drip of different theories and everything that's happened since, and um, the evidence is sort of mounted up very slowly in that kind of way.
Right. I think you convincingly show that something did happen. That this was that this was not like a pure mass psychogenic event,
Hmm.
or was created as like a false flag, or some sort of thing to whip up Cuban, anti-Russian, anti-communist energies or something.
Hmm.
You interview people who were injured from this experience, or I don't know how to describe it exactly. And I was convinced that from your reporting that these people had actual brain injuries and something did happen.
Yeah,
Um, and so I think that is useful because there's probably people, smart people who think that, oh, this thing was just shown to be a hoax or something, or, this is just another crazy thing that happened. We don't need to pay attention to it.
yeah. And it's really there's I think enough evidence out there that some kind of that this is a device that's in active deployment in some places, and we've heard, for example, from U.S. government insiders that this is also a device and tactic that the US has the capability of, and we've heard from sources is deploying in the field themselves. So it's a thing that's out there, right? When it's spread by the end of 2018, there's several thousand cases worldwide. People are claiming it everywhere. To me, it seems like there's a huge amount of that is the psychogenic spread, right? Like,
Mhm.
but I think they do also sit side by side. Like there's no reason to me. What it seems like is that at the core of this was some kind of attack, and I think in the four major clusters that we looked at, which was Havana, Vienna, Hanoi, and Guangzhou, it fits the pattern of some kind of deployment. Like there's motive. Um, Actually, Guangzhou is a difficult one because very difficult to imagine that someone could be operating on Chinese soil without China knowing about it. But certainly Vienna and Havana, we know Russia operates there. We know this fits their pattern. Um, we know that it's the kind of thing they would do, and we know that it's the kind of thing they've done in the past. So there's no reason to be um, that this is outside the realms of possibility.
Mhm.
And then the psychogenic, just sort of there are parts of it that just don't fit the pattern. So it's sort of the only thing that was left. It was sort of an Occam's razor type thing.
Mhm. Okay, so if people, are intrigued, and I mean, it's weird to say like spoiler alert or something, but if people are
Mm-mm.
intrigued and want to follow along with the narrative and your journey in the podcast, they could, go start listening to it right now. And,
Yeah, I mean, it's a heck of a journey that brings us to that conclusion. Like
right,
we did not come to that point lightly, and I think we hopefully in the show can sort of bring the listener along in our train of logic there.
right. Okay, so people, yeah, if people are interested, pause this, download the sound Mystery of Havana Syndrome, listen to all 8 or so episodes, and then they can come back. So let's, I can maybe dig into what you think actually happened. I mean, in some ways, so one theory was this was just insects. The sound was just insects,
Right.
and Americans were not familiar with a native Caribbean insect species. But sort of like you show that okay, that probably is true, but was sort of a red herring
Yeah.
or false lead that got conflated with this real thing that actually happened. So the just crickets thing.
Yeah, it's a very frustrating. So the crickets thing was it came out of a recording of a sound. So the onset of these symptoms was accompanied by, in almost all cases, this kind of screeching, what was described as a screeching kind of metallic sound. And in one of the cases, one of the people recorded the sound in his garden, and then later sound analysis showed that it was the mating call of a type of cricket. And actually, interestingly, a type of cricket that no one had known was on the island of Cuba before. So they literally discovered a new species that way.
Okay.
But that certainly is what the recording was of. Now,
Okay, and so if anyone heard, like a radio or news story about this, they probably played this recording,
yeah,
which it seems very likely is of a cricket and is not connected to the actual case at
yeah,
all.
because it can't it just the sound of cricket within that human band of hearing. It's a very annoying sound. It's a very loud sound. We went to Cuba. We heard it for ourselves. We sort of discovered it, and it was a real moment of, oh yeah, this is a really. But sound is not capable of causing ocular damage. It's not capable of causing brain lesions, which were both things that researchers found in these patients. Um, so yeah, it just became this moment where we just sort of sat down and we were like, okay, two things happen at the same time. Um, Everyone has proposed that there is a causal link, and that it just doesn't fit with the facts as a causal link. So, incredibly frustratingly, we were like, well, this just seems to have happened at the same time, and completely complicated the entire story. Like, it
Yeah.
really sent everyone off down a red herring. Barely even covers it. Just a complete blind alley. Um, that made everyone's reporting on this extremely complicated.
Right. Okay. And then I mean, so people who say this is just crickets, in some ways they have there's like, but it's both right and wrong. And then the
Yeah,
people who
there are
say
crickets there.
yes, the people who say, well, this is just mass hysteria, mass psychogenic event, like there's right and wrong there too, because like
Yeah,
some of this,
like all of this stuff, it's a very nuanced story, right? Like
right.
there is never like Snidely Whiplash in a van holding a ray gun. What it is it's a even more than that. It is this kind of secret microwave energy, not quite war, but everyone's got these devices and it's deploying them,
Okay. So
and
this
that's
is,
just
this is,
happening all the time.
this is the conclusion that you guys came to, is that it, it's some sort of microwave or high frequency, and please correct me if I'm using the wrong terms,
Yeah,
energy that possibly was not used as intending to like hit individual people and mess with their brains, but had another use related to intercepting communications or disrupting
yeah,
communications in specific places. And if people happen to walk through where the beam is going, then it could, give them like a traumatic brain injury, basically.
yeah.
Is that all? Did I describe that accurately?
That's pretty much it. So as far back as the 50s, radiation has been used by Russia in particular, and then later sort of by everyone to activate bugs remotely. So bugs previously were detectable because they had to have their own little recording thing. They had to have their own energy source. Whereas what's called a passive bug is powered, and then the recordings are taken by
And then by
the
bug,
source of
since
energy,
there are bugs in the
listening
story,
device.
literal bugs in the
There's
story.
little bug. Yeah. Oh God. Yes. We're talking surveillance devices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So you described this crazy incident that happened where was it an ambassador was presented with like a wall sculpture or something, and there was
Yeah.
a hidden receiver.
In 1946, I think the then American ambassador to Moscow was presented by this group of school children with this big wooden seal, um, like as in the Great Seal of America. It's the
Mhm.
eagle that's holding a bunch of arrows and blah, 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 the like eagle thing. And he was so pleased with it, he put it up on the back wall of his office. And inside it, inside the beak of this carved eagle, was a little one of these little devices, and they're not detectable by the kind of um, tax that they had to detect things at that time. And so for seven years, it sat there as an active listening. They were listening into everything that was said by the ambassador in his office for 7 years, and that was from using directed microwave energy from across the road from the embassy. And then, as I say, it would turn on that bug, and then the radio waves that would come back would have the sound.
Right. So that yeah. So technology that existed like during after World War II, I guess, you know, could possibly be involved here. And then so part of the I mean, so an incident that happened that made me like question my understanding of what could have happened was the Russian invasion of Ukraine and sort of the um relative incompetence of the Russian military. And then so it was
Mm.
like, oh, so they probably don't have like secret weapons we don't understand or something if they're screwing up this badly. And that was also something that made people think that like maybe the whole like UFO thing was more likely to be real if it wasn't like a Russian like next generation,
I mean,
you
let's
know,
all the Chinese spy balloon
yeah, we
stuff
can
of
leave that to
having
the
just
side,
having like, yeah, oh God.
but it was just like, but this understanding that this is more like not like a weapon exactly, but like an accidental, a byproduct of something that was not intended to injure people, but was intended to like collect
Right.
intelligence.
All
That sort of does maybe make more sense.
Yeah, although it's worth saying that, you know, by this time when it would be pretty clear that it's having kind of deleterious health effects, either whoever's deploying it doesn't care, or it's part of what they're trying to achieve, like a kind of intimidation, like it's a twofer, right?
Right, but it's not like the Russians have a secret weapon that they've invented that is beyond our capabilities of understanding and is causing these
No, I
mysterious
mean it to
things.
me it's even scarier than not only is and there are weapons that use this tech that are explicitly designed to be weapons. But the one of those that we know to exist was the one commissioned by the US Marine Corps. Like it's not beyond America's capability, because we know it's something that America has in its arsenal.
Hmm. Okay, so part of the story is, as I mentioned earlier, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, um, the U.S. government. Well, did they officially release it, or it just was leaked? No, it was released, right? Like
It
a
was released.
report
They released a summary.
saying what they think actually happened, and at least the way it was reported in the media was sort of like, Havana
Kablooey. Yeah,
Syndrome debunked,
right.
which is not not accurate. But
Which
how
is
did?
not what the report actually does to me at all. So the report was so weird. Half of it's redacted, um, and it is incredibly weirdly phrased. They had seven intelligence agencies. It was done by the DNI, which is like the White House coordination of the intelligence agencies bit. And seven agencies participated. We don't know which seven. America's got, what is it, 16 intelligence agencies. We don't know which of the seven
Hmm.
were that participated in this. And they were asked to rank in terms of likely to unlikely that this was, and this is a very specific phrase, that this was a concerted effort by a foreign actor of a weapon. And then they had to rank their answer on a scale of high confident to low confident, right? Now, I think it was 4 said it was, quote, very unlikely. 2 said it was, quote, unlikely. And then the confidence intervals, none of them said they had more than moderate to high confidence. Several said they had low confidence, and one refused to even answer the question. So that's what it stands to me. That's US agencies going, and frankly, from our experience reporting on people like the CIA, like these are agencies that operate like kind of private fiefdoms. We heard it from a source in the State Department that was like, if the CIA knows what's going on, we'd be the last people they'd tell.
I mean, that's why I believe the Director of National Intelligence position was created, because of the failures before
In the
9/11,
run up,
where the various groups had facts that they weren't sharing with each other, because it was like, this is our turf sort of thing.
right,
And so DNI was supposed to get everything and sort of like synthesize it in a way.
yeah,
But yeah,
and
it's
good luck to them.
right. But these are massive bureaucracies, and you describe how the various bureaucracies like screwed up this story from the beginning, and so there could be a cover your ass sort of thing in
Oh,
the
completely.
final report of being like, well, this wasn't our fault that we did, sort of thing. So that's something to keep in mind, that and so like where many stupid things happen on Twitter, when the story came out, a lot of people were like, see, I told you so, like, this is fake
Yeah,
the whole time. Whereas like they're trusting these
yeah,
they're like, oh, now you trust the CIA or something, like,
yeah. I mean, it doesn't, and it's also complicated by the fact there's a whole bunch of lawsuits coming out. There was the Havana Act, which offered finally financial compensation to the people who, have unarguably been severely injured by this, and are injured to this day. I mean, this is people who are severely disabled now, and there's a lot of lawsuits going on, and there's a lot of people who are applying for payments under the Havana Act, and it's certainly, I think, part of the government trying to draw a line under this is, and a lot of the widespread, as I say, is psychogenic, but there's now a lot of people asking to be both evaluated and then compensated. And I think a fair portion of them deserve compensation and have been really screwed over by the government in their response. And even if this entirely was a massive and sort of unprecedentedly huge mass psychogenic event triggered by extreme stress that diplomats were under, that's still a huge failure of the State Department and the CIA's duty of care to its officers. So like the government has fucked up here in whatever way you slice it, like whatever is exactly going on here, whatever the scale of how much there was a kind of tight core device deployed to kind of huge psychogenic spread, like the US and the Trump administration. And then it's worth saying also the Biden administration has not done perfectly on this. There's been a lot of missteps along the way.
Yeah. So in the final episode, you had some big, gets, or landed some big interviews, and one of them was with John Bolton,
Hmm.
the former, he was the national security advisor for about a year,
Yeah,
for Trump. And can you talk about? Well, I mean, were you surprised that he agreed to do an interview, and also
very
talk about
surprised.
sort of
Yeah,
what he said?
he sort of sat down with us, and we'd just come back. So we came back from Cuba, and the line, the message from the Cuban administration that I don't think is particularly unfair is that whatever happened here, and their investigation had found no evidence of an attack, um, was that this had been a pretext for the US government, the new administration, to roll back on what Obama had done, which was open up Cuba. And
Mhm.
tourists had flooded into Cuba, money was finally in the economy, Cuban people had sort of sunk their life savings into opening a little restaurant or an Airbnb. And then the Trump administration used this to put Cuba back on the state sponsor of terror list, to reimpose sanctions. And the Cuban economy just collapsed, like just in on itself like a dying star. And it's devastated to this day. I mean, inflation's out of control. People are leaving. It's caused an enormous amount of misery for the Cuban people. And so we sat down with John Bolton, and we wanted to put this to him. We wanted to say, like, this is what the Cubans are saying, that this was just an excuse for you to do everything you wanted to do. And he was like, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. This was not part of our decision matrix. We were going to do this anyway. and more than that, he said, we knew from the beginning that the Cubans would like extremely unlikely to be the ones responsible for this, both in terms of their interests, or their capabilities. But we, wanted to punish them anyway. And so we followed up and said, well, hang on, if that early on you had a suspicion that someone else was the suspect, and everyone was, obviously Russia is top of the suspect list in this kind of thing. And he said that, and this blew our minds completely. He said that they felt they couldn't take that briefing that Russia was likely behind if something was happening here to Trump because they thought he would side with Russia. He said that he was like, we didn't know what he would do. We didn't know if he would just pick up the phone and call the Kremlin, right? And I was just floored by that because that's every time you think the Trump administration can't surprise you, it jumps out with something like that, which is just gobsmacking.
Yeah, I mean, Bolton wrote a book like, he turned on Trump, Trump turned on him, and he, is no longer a fan of Trump if he ever was. So, he wrote a book about all the crazy stuff he witnessed, and
it was called something like Duty or
but he's a loathsome figure in many ways, and it like has
he's the bomb Iran guy.
Yes, he's been bad for the past 20 years of American foreign policy. Like often when something bad happened, he had a hand in it. But it it makes sense. Yeah, if what we know of Trump, if they had said, well, we think it's Russia, Trump, Trump was friends with Putin, and whether or not you believe that Putin like secretly helped Trump get elected, Trump was naturally predisposed
couldn't be trusted with intelligence information pertaining to one of America's largest geopolitical right like that's
and then Trump explicitly said at one point in that press conference with Putin that if Putin said something, he would believe it over the American intelligence agency.
He literally just
that was one of the things about Trump. He would just say it, and so Bolton is just saying it,
always saying the quiet part out loud.
So that part of it, the weirdness of like you have this bizarre event, and then you have the most bizarre president in U.S. history in office during it. Made that
take that Rutherford B. Hayes.
Oh yeah, Trump is far worse than any of the bearded late 19th century.
I know nothing about Rutherford B. Hayes. No further questions.
Right. Okay. So you interviewed, going back a little bit, you've interviewed victims, people who are suffering from this. What was that experience like? And did you come in skeptical, and after talking to them, you were convinced, or how did?
We went in with a sort of twofold approach. Like we were obviously approaching all of the information we were getting with skepticism, but also with an open mind to the lived experience of the people we were talking to, and their stories were over and over again completely heartbreaking. I mean, lives completely destroyed by this. People who can't, who are sort of housebound now, who have trouble speaking, trouble forming thoughts, a lot of people with trouble seeing or hearing. It was clear that something pretty drastic had happened here. And we went so over backwards trying to make the psychogenic hypothesis fit with some of these people. And psychogenic, like, it's unarguably powerful. Like, it has the capability to cause powerful physical effects. When we're talking about these tens of people who are still severely disabled to this day, even the proponents of psychogenic theory will say that usually effects fade over time with sort of a reduction of the stress environment that kind of caused the psychogenic event. We weren't seeing that. We were seeing people who are permanently devastated by this, and it was a really impactful experience to hear from and have these people share their stories with us. And it was a real honor to be able to tell them. But something had clearly happened. I mean, this was a powerful thing that they'd gone through.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you say, or you quote a doctor to the effect of, it seemed like these people had, been in like a massive car accident or something,
right?
Like, looking at what the state of their brains, but there was
the phrase they used was the immaculate concussion. They were seeing traumatic brain injuries like you'd get from a NFL wide receiver after a big hit, but with no trauma at all,
Hmm.
like no physical trauma.
So, okay, well, let's talk about maybe the podcast as an audio a piece of audio that exists itself. It's this sounds better than almost any podcasts I've ever listened to, and you have a great like score, and you have at one point a choir
Yeah,
singing, and you talk a lot about sound and what sound is, and but like sound as a metaphor and the power of
yeah.
sound, and yeah, but just this it's worth listening to just as like a interesting audio
We
experience, I think. Can you
I
talk
got
about this part of it?
yeah, I got extremely lucky with the people that I got to work with, because we went into this because it's and the first suggestion was it was a sonic weapon. The symptoms were all accompanied by the onset of this weird sound. Sound was kind of at the core of this story, and so we really wanted to make something where the sound design and the music reflected, and helped to tell the story. And so, Go Rodeo, who was the fantastic production company we worked with in Washington, um, Max Johnston, who was the lead producer, along with um, Becca and Ian and Megan and everyone else at Go Rodeo, just did a fabulous job of making it sound so good. And we also found these incredible musicians, a string quartet called the Taka Quartet, who created a fabulous soundscape for the production team to use. So yeah, I just got really lucky essentially, and yeah, it does sound fantastic. They've done tremendous work.
I think most people probably be intrigued by this story because it's so strange, but like I think there's, this should be checked out as just an interesting like evolution of, podcasting form, and, what can be done in
Thank you
this
very much. That's
relatively
really
new
nice to
medium.
hear.
Okay, anything, I think we covered most of the things I wanted to talk about. Anything else you want to mention about the podcast or the story before we wrap up?
Um, I think we covered everything. Yeah, it's sort of, the Cuba thing it was the other thing that was. I just want to say again was so stark to me was how much this has just completely destroyed the nation of Cuba. Like it's really really stark to have seen that. So that in some ways we went into it and we built our own test weapon. We did all sorts of fun
Right,
things like
right.
that. But there's also a moment of sort of stepping back. We're like, oh, this is something that's really had a devastating effect. Um, so there was sort of a serious moment at the end of the reporting where we sort of like, oh, wow, this has been a really impactful event. And so it was fascinating to work on, from that perspective, just kind of watching history take place.
Right. And America's Cuba policy has been irrational and,
Mm,
captive to specific interests and the related to the electoral college for so long, and it seemed very promising, towards the end of the second Obama administration, when he like did this way of opening it up, like bypassing Congress,
yeah, and there
and
was so much hope.
yeah, and then that this totally bizarre event scuttled that. I don't know
Hmm.
what is the state of the Biden,
Nothing.
Biden administration's
The
relationship
Biden
with.
administration has done nothing to change what Trump did in reaction to this. That Cuba remains a pariah. As a European, as soon as I set foot in Cuba, my ability to fly to the US without applying for a visa disappeared. So that's,
Huh.
you know, it's not just all the, thousands and thousands of American tourists who now can't go to Cuba. People from the rest of the world can't go to Cuba without it affecting their ability to go to the United States. So it's just like putting an entire country in like the cooler, right? Like it's dreadful. And I think it's a real um, embarrassment for the Biden administration that they haven't done more to undo the damage that Trump did.
Yeah, and the cynical view was always that this was about Florida politics
Hmm.
and winning Florida the electoral college, and Florida has moved so far right.
Right, Florida's a red state now.
Yeah,
Like, why
Florida has
does it?
basically seems to be lost to the Democrats for some length of time. So why not
Yeah,
just do the right thing?
and bizarrely they
And
seem to have swapped it for Georgia, which is interesting to me.
right,
Georgia now very
yeah.
powerful.
So you can't lose Florida any more than they're currently than the
Yeah,
Democrats are currently losing it. Why not try to like do something good for both
yeah, it's
sides
very
when
frustrating. But
yeah.
there is a huge pressure from Florida politicians who come from the very anti-Cuba, um, like exiles from the regime, people like Marco Rubio, who are very, very anti-Cuba and are constantly pushing for. And these people with a lot of clout, Rubio sits on the Intelligence Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, whichever one that is. But yeah, like this is the Biden administration caving to pressure from this particular part of politics and not fixing something which I think it has a moral duty to fix.
Right. And it's not just Republicans. It's I'm in New Jersey right now. The one of our two senators, Bob Menendez, is Cuban
Right.
American, and
Yes.
he's very powerful. I don't know if he's on foreign affairs or what, but
He sits
he's
on a couple committees as well. Yeah, he's a
yeah,
big.
he has a outsized power in
Yeah.
American foreign policy, and is also extremely anti communist regime in Cuba. So yeah, so it's I guess it's just not just Florida. Like there's a
Right.
huge, I'm in Hudson County, New Jersey. There's a huge Cuban American population here, but yeah, it is complicated, and the raw politics of it. You can see why they're doing it, but it's
Mm.
it,
Yeah,
it
it's still
like it was
shameful,
brave
I
for
think.
Obama to do this, but yeah, it is disappointing that Biden hasn't tried to change anything from Trump's
Yeah.
position. Okay, so why don't we end things there? So
Great.
once again, it's The Sound Mystery of Havana Syndrome. A link will be in the show notes, but people can use whatever podcast app they want and find it there. So if people want to follow your stuff in particular, where would you direct them to go?
Best way is I'm at Nicky Woolf on Twitter. That's NICKYWOOLF. While Twitter still exists.
Right.
I guess I'm the same on Mastodon if that's going to be the next one, which I don't know that it is, but yeah, whatever. I'll go by my name in whatever the post Twitter world looks like, I guess. Maybe it's the metaverse.
I don't think it's going to be the metaverse,
I don't think it's going to be the metaverse.
Yeah, something will emerge, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually, since the last episode I recorded, I started a feed just for this podcast on Twitter, which if people just want to follow that, they can do so, and that is the handle will be in the links, and it's culturally DET. Culturally debt is the is the feed just for
Nice.
For links for this, so people can follow that, or they can follow me if they want to as well at ARYEHCW. Okay, Nicky, thank you for taking the time. I really enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoyed the podcast. I recommend anyone who is interested in the story check it out.
Yeah, this is great fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you again. And thanks to all the listeners out there. We'll see you again next time.